Hey guys, Ethereal Light Art here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new to this channel and you like light painting, long exposure photography, or creativity, you're in the right place. Please subscribe and like, share with your artist friends, leave me a comment, I do appreciate them. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Welcome to the next episode of Dude, Where's My Flashlight? We have Instagram Tom Hill from Newcastle, England. Tom, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, mate.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, dude, I am so inspired, like everyone that sees your art, that gets to know you personally. I gotta say, I'm super inspired, dude. I love the new work. You're a Light Painting Paradise ambassador. Congratulations on that. It's a huge honor. It's a great team.
Yeah, they are. They're lovely people. Absolutely lovely people. I mean, I kind of obviously I'm an ambassador for them because I use their stuff. But a lot of it is also because I know them all personally, and they are super, super nice people. I mean, I think you've spoken to Ivan a couple of times, and the guy is just the loveliest guy you can meet, basically.
No, a huge asset to this community. I've had actually, I think 3 or 4 ambassadors from Light Painting Paradise on this season that hasn't aired yet, but we've talked a lot about the new light painting torch.
That thing's a beast.
It is a beast, and you know, I love Frodo. He was on last season. He did an awesome explanation in Spanish. Tom, can you give us a little bit in English? Those that don't speak Spanish, can you talk a little bit through it? I know Stephen did a little bit on it. How do you use it primarily, and why do you use it? Like, what do you use it for?
No problem. Basically, it is a work of love from Light Painting Paradise. Basically, I think everybody who's a light painter at some point in their life has had that chat with another light painter where you say, if I could build a flashlight, it would do this, and it would do this, and it would do this. And you come up with these crazy ideas, and it just sits there as one of those things that you chat about. And it's, yeah, wouldn't it be amazing? And Light Painting Paradise were mad enough to say, okay, fair enough, let's do that. So they went off and found Dennis Riubert from Germany, German light painter, really nice guy, who also happens to be very good with firmware. So he can actually write the code for microcontrollers. So he basically wrote a custom firmware from scratch, designed around how a light painter might want to use a torch. And he'd been dealing with some prototype ones that he'd give out to friends of him, or sell to friends, or sell to light painters that he knew for a while. And I'd actually had one of the prototypes and been using it, and I'd mentioned it to Ivan, and Ivan was like, well, I'm looking to make a flashlight, so can you put me in touch with Dennis? And I put the two of them in touch. And then Ivan's gone off and basically found a manufacturer, like a professional proper torch manufacturer, who was willing to put that firmware into a proper pro body, which means it's fully waterproof down to 2 meters or something like that. So no more, oh bugger, I've dropped it in a puddle. You don't need to worry about it. And they were willing to make a few tweaks to it. So like the normal torch that it's based on has got an illuminated button. And obviously illuminated buttons are no use for flashlights, for light painters. So they basically said, yeah, we need to take that out. And they took that out. And basically, yeah, we prototyped it for, we've been trying these things out amongst the ambassadors for about 6 months, just basically providing feedback and saying, look, you know, this would be really useful. So some of the stuff that's come in since the original prototype one that I had is this idea of a flash mode, which is the ability to literally, you when you press the button, it does a 5 millisecond flash, and then that's it. So if you want to freeze something, whether it's like somebody's hand, you just point the torch at it and bam, 5 milliseconds, no blurring at all because it's so quick. Or you can get a tool, you can put a tool on the end of it and bip, 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 put it exactly where you want, and it'll freeze it in place. But it's just, I mean, it's got everything that you'd want from a flashlight. It's got multiple brightness modes. It's got 3 entirely different strobe modes, each of which can have the brightness and the frequency configured. And then to top it all off, you can memorize anything that you've just done and say, well, now I want that on the back button, or I want that on the side button. And it's phenomenal. I mean, I wrote the manual for it, so hopefully it's clear, because I spent a while on that one. Because my day job involves doing software stuff, so I'm vaguely used to sort of writing manuals and instructions and stuff. So I said, well, I'll do that one. And yeah, it's an amazing piece of technology. And as I say, it's just astonishing that somebody actually, because I mean, light painting, when it comes down to it, it's not a massive market, is it? It's a fairly niche art form. And to put in all the effort to basically go find somebody to write custom firmware, to find a manufacturer who'll do it, to prototype it, to get all of the, get it all back and then release it into the community is amazing. And, Ivan should rightly be proud of what he's done on that one.
Amen. And as well as you, thank you for writing that manuscript. I have read it. I do own one. I've used it on similar complex compositions like the one behind me in this cave. So thank you for that. It's been amazing, mate. And you talk about light painting being a niche art. Do you see it? If we can fast forward 5 to 10 years, do you see this maybe becoming more mainstream? I mean, I'm talking like world recognized art. There's no way we can stop the growing fever of light painting. It's inside.
I know what you mean. Yep.
Do you see this happening and going mainstream? And then what does that look like?
It's a very tricky one, is the answer, because I sort of probably veer between 2 extremes, which is I can see it becoming mainstream. Yeah, I can certainly see it getting a lot more interest, but equally I can see as sort of technology improves and changes, that in a way it'll get harder and harder to tell what's Photoshop and what's light painting. And I don't know whether, sort of when people talk mainstream, they generally talk commercial, effectively. It's like when you start seeing it on a music video or you see it on an advert or something like that, that tends to be what people mean by commercial. It's become mainstream where you see it somewhere where you wouldn't expect it. You see it on a Sony advert or something like that. And the problem is that going to happen, or will they just fake it? You don't know. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Trust me, I struggle with this a lot. Something profound that really hit me hard is when we were first starting to maybe coordinate a time to get us together. We started talking about maybe doing just light painting for fun and doing it commercially. And I am very, very close, if not already, on the brink of making this decision of taking my art commercially, or staying and maybe even honoring that inner child creative in me that says, no, I just want to do this for fun. I don't want the obligatory responsibility of having to do this and maybe what to do. Somebody's like, I want flames behind my Porsche. And it's, okay, I can do that.
I don't want to.
But that doesn't really give me any creative expansion or any creative input from my soul into this project. And so I have a hard time with that. I think it's very, very apparent when somebody paints for fun and somebody paints for money. It can be, I guess. Yeah,
I was going to say there's a balancing act, because I mean, Frodo, for example, who you've had on the show, he does it. That is basically now his job. It's what he does, is light painting. But he also very much still I mean, obviously, he vastly still has the love for it. He's one of the most enthusiastic guys about light painting you'll ever meet. But also, it's clear from what he does that he won't be talked into doing something that he doesn't want to do. If he's going to do a project for you, he's going to do it his way. And sort of he seems to manage that. I have a lot of respect for that.
Me too.
Me personally, it's a hobby and it's staying a hobby. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, Brett, mate, and for right now, that's how I stand. I do sell prints. I do work for Airbnb experiences. When people want to come to town and see my city, I get to show them my city. I get to tell them about my city. It's not just about the photography and the light painting and the magic that we create together. It's also about a little bit getting to know my city, and some of the beautiful places that we have. I live downtown Portland, Oregon. There's some amazing parks that we can, I can shoot out to, and there's some great stuff
Oh
there.
yeah. I know that one. When I used to do a lot of landscape photography when I started out, sort of in photography full stop. And some of the people I used to follow a lot were all Portland based because some of the waterfalls and the canyons and stuff like that. It was just like, wow, that place looks that place looks amazing. So no, Portland and the Oregon area was always somewhere on my sort of landscape to shoot list.
Well, mate, you have a place to crash here. You have a light painter to show you around and to collaborate with. I'm always open for all of that. Anyone, but especially you. If you ever make it this way, let me know. I can graciously host you or help in any way possible.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, mate. I want to talk real quick. I do have obviously a list of things I want to talk about, but I also like to keep these interviews organic, like my art and light painting. Just every single light painting from the time the shutter starts to it stops. It's a unique capture. Something you just mentioned about 2 or 3 minutes ago was, it's hard to tell these days what's photoshopped and what's not. And the only thing I hate worse than photo editing is taxes. So you won't see a lot of overproduction in my work. In fact, very little. I don't really want to talk about that because I think it's a touchy subject, and I know every artist feels differently. But do you think that there's a way or a system that we could come up with, almost like blockchain? I know Mafu over there is trying to get this Hive account going, and I want to support that. I want to send a shout out to that group, because I think there is something to be said for honesty and transparency in this. And I want to make sure, at least I hope that the community can agree that you doing your art and the way you do it, as long as it's transparent and you're honest about how you edit your photos or what you do and what you don't do, I think that's the key,
Yeah, I feel very much that way. And I actually really like some purely digital art, like some of the guys on who do digital matte painting, so the equivalent of what they used to do for sci-fi films and stuff, where they used to paint in the backdrops and they used to do it all manually, and now it's all done on computers. And I've actually got a print somewhere, I can't remember where, but I've got a print of a guy who does digital matte painting, and the guy is amazing. So these are 8-hour works of sitting there detailed in Photoshop, merging mountains and UFO, just merging all of this stuff together, and you end up with something that looks photorealistic and is just phenomenal, and they're works of art. And they make no bones about the fact that it is a digital creation, and as long as you do that, I do not care how much Photoshop you put into your work. If you want to do a light painting that you've also added a load of stuff to, cool, as long as you say, look, here's the light painting bit, here's the digital bit, this is a composite of 5 shots, whatever, that's fine. Every now and again I have to, because now and again I'll go out alone and I'll want to do something like a camera rotation where I haven't got a flash with me, I've only got a torch, so I need to go back to the camera and switch the torch off, do stuff. In that case, I haven't really got any option. My camera's got a multi-exposure mode. I'll do it in camera, and then when I post it, I'll say this was done multiple exposure in camera because of this. And quite often I'll try and explain, you can do this as a single exposure if you've got somebody else with you. Stick a piece of black card in front of the lens, do this, do that, done. But I was on my own. What else am I going to do? I'm not one of these people who will say, I'm not going to take this shot because I can't do it in one exposure because I'm the only person here. If it's a choice between I have a shot that I've got in my head, I'm on my own, the only way to get that shot with the kit that I've got with me is to do it in a multiple exposure, I'll do it in a multi-exposure. But it's rare, because most of the time I'm either with somebody else and I can just say, right, yeah, can you cap the lens for me or whatever? or I've got the right tools. So I've got a flash gun with me and I can say, well, I'll use a remote trigger for a flash instead of a flashlight. It tends to be if I'm on holiday, because if I'm on holiday and I'm on my own, it's like I don't travel when I go on holiday with 4 tons of, light stands and flashes and this, that, and the other. And I still want to take pictures. So, sort of I'll use whatever tools I've got at my disposal. But yeah, just as long as you're clear. On that subject, the answer is that Frodo found something the other day which was quite interesting, which is a service which basically you upload. I'm not entirely sure. To be fair, I'm not entirely sure how it works because I've not used it. But I know that he was talking to Carlos Calero about it. And basically what you do, I think, is you upload the raw file and the final image, and it effectively will then give it a grade in terms of how much it's been manipulated in order to end up with the final image. So it picks up things like if you've added or removed pixels, if you've changed levels, that kind of stuff. And depending on the amount that you've done, you get like an A, B, C, D kind of thing. So he was saying that that'd be useful for competitions, which is, to be honest, competitions is the one place where I think it's kind of most important, because it, if somebody wants to lie on Facebook that they created something in one exposure when they didn't, I don't really care. You're only cheating yourself, as it were.
Totally.
But if the problem is that we have in the UK, we've got a competition called Landscape Photographer of the Year, and the idea is it's no digital retouch. You can change levels and that kind of stuff, but no mucking about.
Yeah.
And there have been several years where stuff has had to be pulled up after they've been awarded stuff, because people have pointed out that sky's been completely like composited in. It's like 2 exposures. Or there was another one where I think somebody had put something like into the foreground that hadn't been there before, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the thing. If you're doing a competition, you want the person to have won it fairly. So that's the sort of place I could see that kind of technology maybe working. So you basically go, here is the original, here's the one that I submitted to the competition, and a piece of software looks at it and says, dude, those are not very similar at all.
Mate, this is music to my ears. From being more of a purist in this art form, I can't wait for something like this to happen, because you could put that. I often show the back of my camera in my set of photos. Look, this is on the back of the camera. These are the levels of the light. I definitely use Lightroom for a little bit, tweaks in here. I try to keep the integrity. I'm not going to talk about the spiritual integrity of manipulating a piece of art, but because I promised you I would not get into that. But I truly feel that this would be an amazing help to this community and push people to try to better themselves, right? And try to capture as much in camera as possible and try to nail the exposure for the, you have to, that's part of light painting, is matching the luminosity of your torch. Just like the light painter can have 9 different settings. I mean, that's why this torch individually is so awesome, because it allows you to get really detailed and specific to the aperture versus the luminosity that you're going to put in the photo. And that is absolutely amazing. One thing I gleaned from your interview recently, and thank you for speaking Spanish. I know it's not your first English, for the landscape interview, which was an amazing compilation of a bunch of awesome artists and amazing interviews. It was an amazing 5-hour event, which was a long one, which was great. But one of the things I gleaned, and I didn't even have this in my notes, this might go really long actually, because I talked to you about. It's so good, man. It's so good to have this going. But was your black 45-degree angled tube? I've never seen that before, and it leads me to all kinds of different questions. But the one I want to ask you is, can you go through that technique? It was really, really super helpful for me. And I know if it's helpful for me, it's going to be helpful for others. It was in Spanish.
No problem at all. I'm pretty sure I've actually got it knocking around. If you just give me 2 seconds, I will fetch a bag of tools and see if I've got the thing right. Yeah, so there's that. Oh yeah, right. Okay. So it's basically just it's a dead straightforward backlighting technique. I don't know if obviously everybody knows Palateth, and he did a video a while back about something that he called a backlight scanner.
Yes, it's the one on the ground. He's like, I
So
love that one.
the backlight scanner is basically you get a torch. So I'll get my light painting torch here, and you put effectively one cone on it that goes out like that, and then in front of it you put a second cone. So the idea is that the second cone blocks the torch from the camera, so the camera can't see the head of the torch. But between the two cones, there's basically a channel going off at sort of 45 degrees or so, and the light can come out of there and effectively light up the scene. So you can walk from the back of the exposure to the front of the exposure with this torch held out in front of you, and it lights up the whole scene with light heading towards the camera. And obviously the big thing about that is as soon as you backlight stuff, you get amazing textures compared with lighting it from in front. And it's a very, very cool technique. The thing is, I'm fairly crap at DIY. And constructing, he's got this lovely technique where he sort of builds these things together. And at some point, I will get round to getting some bits and putting it together. But one of the things I find kind of important in the tools that I take around is that they're non-breakable, dead simple, and aren't going to fail on me at any point, because I live in England. It rains all the time. My stuff gets wet, it gets dropped, it gets all of the things that are bad for tools. So I was thinking about, well, how can I make something to give me a nice, soft illumination in the frame without being overly complicated? So what I basically did was got a piece of acrylic rod and I sanded it. So it's just nice fine sandpaper, make it lovely and opalescent. Yep, that's the stuff. Sand it down so that it's opalescent. And then basically, if you've got that and you stick it into a torch adapter, then like so, when you light it up, it glows. And it gives you a really nice omnidirectional illumination that's quite soft, because rather than having like a point on the flashlight where all the light's coming from, it's coming from something that's about 5-10 centimeters long. So you get a nice soft illumination. But the problem is, obviously, you can't walk around the frame waving one of those. It's going to show up a bit.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, well, how can I hide it? And Pala initially used to use what he called the black card technique. So you put a piece of black card in front of whatever it is you're using, and you use your torch like that just to light things up. But cardboard, England, rain.
No good.
Not a good combination. So I was like, well, what can I use that is black and durable? So I looked in the shed and I found some drain pipe.
Awesome.
It's black. It's solid.
Sturdy. Yep.
Waterproof, not going anywhere, and it's cheap. So I thought, well, that should probably work. So what I've basically done is cut off the thing. I've cut two diagonals. And the reason for that is if you have it that way round, so you've just got a curve, then when you're looking at it from an angle, these 2 points become quite visible to the camera, particularly if you've got a light. So the light catches those points and the camera can see it when it comes in at 45 degrees.
Yes.
Whereas if you cut off the points, you literally cannot see until you get to there on the camera. You can't see anything inside here. So all you need to do at that point is you put the torch behind it, switch on the torch, and hey presto, you can light things up and there's no visibility at all of the torch. No. The only thing you need to watch out for is if you're in, Oregon or you're in the UK, sometimes it's like down towards zero. And at that point, when you breathe out, you get a cloud of condensation. So what I tend to do is when I'm doing this, I'll hold it out to the side. So if I'm walking towards the camera, I'll have the light sort of there so that none of my breath or anything else can get onto the camera, get in front of the light. And yeah, you literally, at that point, it's dead straightforward. You basically start off in the center of the image, point this out at 45 degrees or so to the camera so that it's completely shielded, and just walk towards the camera with this thing, and it's just sending out a nice soft light off to the sides. And you end up with a really sort of smooth illumination for something that is 2 pieces of plastic and a 5 centimeter piece of rod. It's not technical, but it's quite neat.
That's amazing, mate. It's these little tweaks, it's these little things, little gems you get, and then, people hopefully will grab onto this and make better textures in their photos. I mean, when you think about it, especially in your photos, one thing I see is just awesome execution. And let's talk about symmetry. Number one, about 6 months ago, I find symmetry aesthetically pleasing in my art. Yep. Something about nature seems to be very symmetrical. And so when I'm often in nature or when I'm looking at nature, I'm often seeing that we are symmetrical beings, bifurcated as a human. Usually usually, yeah, and so
yeah,
I find that aesthetically pleasing. Why is symmetry so important to you in your art, and how do you use it? Or is it important?
The why is, I think that's always one of the hardest questions, isn't it?
Which I know.
Why do I like the way things look? I think part of it is because my background is very much on the scientific side. So like my original degree was in theoretical physics, so sort of done down that lines, and then I did computer science. I've always had like an artistic sort of bent. I've always enjoyed doing art, but in terms of sort of, I suppose, my mindset, I'm very much a sort of logical, scientific computer programmer, that kind of stuff. So probably it comes partly from that, which is that I've always, sort of that kind of geometry, that kind of stuff I've always found quite interesting. But I can't really, I suppose, say exactly why. Just that, when I look at photos, generally the ones that I'm happiest with are the ones that are either certainly, they don't necessarily have to be symmetrical, but there has to be a certain balance, and it tends not to be sort of massively free form. It tends to be very much right. There's a one of those and a one of those, and they connect together like this, or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's definitely it's not necessarily has to be symmetrical, but it has to have a certain look to it that it makes things jump out at me effectively.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that brings us to the next maybe question, and maybe probably even a more pertinent question is order. This is where I think we really, 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 really connect, is because I come up with this methodology, and I've actually used some of your pieces of art, some of Sam Mass Street Art's pieces of art, what I consider multi-level single exposure light paintings, and where you do the first part, you get done. You do the second part, you get done. You do the third part, and up to 5, I'm up trying to do 6, 7 levels of light painting, which means I'm grabbing a different tool and a different light source, and I'm coming back to the same spot, or I have it on me. I wear this vest and I have all these different things on me, and I'm like, okay, this is where order comes in. Number 1, I'm going to do a tube spin. Boom. Put that down. 2, I do something, and I go from the largest tool, the largest amount of light, into the finest detail. And I think Sam would agree that I asked him on his podcast, he sort of does the same. Do you there's no way you can do this kind of complex orbs, complex compositions without some sort of order. You know what I mean? Because that would just be chaos. And I think, you and I come from a mathematical kind of maybe quantum physics kind of mindset. And so I need order. Can you speak on order and the complexity in some of your work?
I mean, what you've described is basically one of the things that I talk about in some of my like conferencey type things and workshopy type things that I've done, which is what I describe it as thinking in layers. Because what I see is a lot of people, they go out into, go to do a light painting, and they do a thing, and then they're done. So they'll do a thing, and they'll light up the scene, and then that's it. And what I try and encourage people to do is think about the picture in layers, and not as in Photoshop layers, but layers of light.
Yes.
So you can always make something look more complicated just by adding lots of simple things.
Totally.
I think one of my favorites actually for that is some of the stuff that I've done just with an orb tool. So just circles. The only thing you can create with an orb tool is circles. But if you go, right, I have a circle, and then you move, one pace to the left and you draw another circle, and a pace to the right and you draw another circle, and then you add some smaller ones, and then you add, and you just keep adding circles, but you position them correctly, you'll end up with something that looks mental. It looks like it's incredibly complicated, and it is just circles. It was something I actually started doing it because I was doing a chat, and I'd done a talk about this concept of building things up in layers, and I said, look, I'm going to do. I was in a big gym building in Spain somewhere, doing a talk after a conference, and we'd hooked up an Olympus so you could do it on live demo. And it was hooked up to a projector. And I said, look, I've not done this before, but I'm going to basically give it a shot. So what I want to do is try and create the most complicated thing that I possibly can using nothing but an orb tool. So the only thing that I can create is circles. And in the end, sort of I ended up with this quite complicated form, some spirals going down each side and some tubes. And I mean, it wasn't the best photo I've ever done. It was like the first time. Yeah, I mean, that's a classic example. That is just circles, but it's circles that are positioned specifically. Yes. And so that's the way I work, absolutely. And I tend to think things out in advance. So I have like a pad of paper, and I'll tend to sketch things out just roughly, just ideas. I know probably got they'll be bad, but I'll have some knocking around.
Dude, this is like peeking behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain, dude. We're like looking at the magic.
So they tend to be really badly drawn, but I don't know how well this is going to be put. Oh yeah, there you go.
No, awesome, dude. Totally awesome.
So you can kind of see that basically, and what I do is I draw that sort of thing out, and half of them won't work, but I generally have some notes next to them which say, sort of, okay, start off with this, draw this, try this, and yeah, I'll do the same as you. Because I'm in the UK, quite often it can be a bit wet underfoot, so I actually quite often go out in welly boots, and I'll actually put light painting tools down them as a storage location.
Amazing.
So I'll go out with like if I've got acrylic rods or something like that, and I know that I'm going to need 2 or 3, I'll stick them down my welly, and then that way they're easily accessible and they're not going anywhere.
So good. Yeah. So good, mate. Well, I really appreciate the multi-level. It adds so much depth to your photo. It adds, like you said, if you can just add simplistic things, it really, really, really ups the complexity of the image. It adds just so much more. I personally think that way. And I also think it actually expands your creativity. It's like, that's why I try to learn as many techniques and use as many different tools as possible, because every single thing offers its own benefit. And if you can mix and match all of those things little by little, you are coming into your own unique style. And for me, that's super important. That is absolutely important to me as an artist, is to stay creative, to stay fresh, to never be stagnant, to always do something different, to push myself. And so for me, I really value that in this art form.
Really. I honestly think it's probably, if I had to give one piece of advice to anybody that was doing light painting, I think there's a saying, I think it was Coco Chanel or something like that basically said, always take off the last thing that you put on, if you know what I mean. This was a discussion about being stylish, and it was basically don't overdo it.
Yes.
Well, with light painting, I think if I was going to give a piece of advice, it's try adding something more effectively. If you've got a technique that you know how to do, so you know how to do some nice the circle. Let's take the classic, the Eric Paré circle behind a model.
Yeah.
If you can do that, and you can do that well,
yep,
try getting yourself a calligraphy tool and add some stuff and mix that with the circle, because you'll end up with something that's a bit different to what 90% of people have got. Or try and add whatever it might. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Sort of a lot of people, that would be a model, a circle, some illumination, and you're done. But by adding the extra stuff, you end up with something that's a bit more unique. Exactly. Spot on. So yeah, I think that's what I would say is, so if you're gonna just try. So the first time you do it, it'll look awful. That's the way light painting works. You do something, it looks awful. You do it again, it looks slightly less awful. You do it 1,000 times, and eventually it looks pretty damn good.
For me, as a creative artist, and I often just, especially when actually, I found how I warm up or how I really get into this is my newfound love of calligraphy and abstract art. Something that I'm super inspired with Sam Mass's art and other calligraphy artists out there, Julian Breton, some of the older veteran light painters, and it allows me just the absolute freedom to not be symmetrical, to be abstract, to live in the void of going in, not having anything sketched out, and literally just freestyling for an hour. And I'm talking like maybe 15 to 20, 2 to 3 minute compositions that are all very different. It allows me to be like, if I did this last time, I'm going to do just the opposite, or I'm going to, instead of 3 plant leaves going this way, I'm going to do 5 this way. I often use prime numbers in my art. I don't something strong about prime numbers, and it's often goes against my symmetrical love, because obviously you can't be symmetrical in a
primes.
Way, a prime number. So I really love the fact that my motto in that, I guess, to further your advice, is to say, if you, like you said, if you know a technique, and I like to often think of simple techniques, like if you look at the image that maybe is just behind us, this is a little bit more complex than I maybe want to show. I want to go back to the one of the Eric Parade tube spin, because this is actually, if we go back to the one I just showed, the pink one, there's little plants on the ground, and these plants, literally anyone can draw these little plants. And I did this with my light painting Paradise pencil, but if you look at these plants, they're literally like 3 little marks. I'm trying to get my finger here. If you look at these little plants, they're like 3 little pin marks. And I'm literally just going like this. But if you do enough of those,
they look interesting.
It makes it a little bit more interesting. And I think if you can just add simple things to your light paintings, they become much more. And it's honestly, I like to call it simple and safe. Like, don't really try to go for the grand slam home run or the penalty kick. Like, don't try the...
No, those ones tend to take quite a lot of preparation. Like, if I'm going for something that's really exact, that takes a lot of setting up. But yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things when which I haven't done for a while, and actually I must add back in at some point, when I was starting off, was literally I had a ping pong ball, and I'd cut a hole in the ping pong ball that would fit one of the one of the torches I was using at the time, and I would just draw. Like, if I was anywhere that had a symmetry to it, so like I was in a corridor, or I was in a tunnel, or anything like that, or on a rail track that had railway, I would just basically put these balls, and they are literally just white balls, but heading towards the camera kind of thing, and it gives that perspective. And they're super simple, but they just add a little bit more. It's just, so I could have not put those in, and it would, even though they add nothing technically at all, it is literally bip, bip, bip. What they do add is they make it different, and they just add that little extra facon of interest that isn't there otherwise. So yeah, little things like that make a big difference, I think.
No, absolutely, mate. And I said I have a few words when I see your art. Obviously, we talked about symmetry, but the other 2 words that I have for you is depth, because you often come forward and back to the camera. You're very well astute on doing the foreground and doing the background, and making sure that those obviously get included. Like you said, some people just light paint and they just do the one thing. They don't think about the foreground. They don't think about the background. They don't think about the little things that you could just quickly add, and it adds so much texture to the photo. So can you talk about depth and coming towards the camera, coming back to the camera?
Yeah, I mean, for that side of things, you need to really start thinking in 3 dimensions a little bit, because quite often when I'm planning something out, I have to physically plan things out, in that, for example, if I've done stuff before where I've got an orb in the center and I've got things starting off on either side, and the key is, if you want your stuff to look real, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If I'm doing an orb and I want it to look solid, I cannot have anything behind it
Yeah.
that's illuminated, because it
Yes.
just ruins the whole thing. And
Yes.
all of a sudden you can tell it's made out of light, and that it's not this solid marble of loveliness. It's all of a sudden it's ruined. So if I want to add spirals on either side, I need to make sure that my spirals do not go behind the orb. But that's a bit tricky because you can't see the orb. So what I'll end up doing is, I wonder how, I've got a piece of it knocking around. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
See if I can reach over here. I use this stuff like it's going out of fashion. And this is luminous tape.
Okay. Cool.
So what I do basically is I cut out tiny little 1 centimeter squares of this glowy green tape, and I take them with me. And if I am trying to do something like that, which requires precision, I will go out and I will basically get a rock and I will hide a piece of luminous tape behind the rock so that the camera can't see it.
Yeah.
But I know that that is the middle of my orb.
Yeah.
And at that point, for example, what I might do is put my the LED umbrella that I use for making the orbs, I'll put it on the ground at the extension of my arm, so I know that that's the outside of the orb. And then I'll go back to the camera and look and say, okay, so if I take a line from the camera going through the end of that umbrella, where does it need to start in order for my stuff not to overlap? And then I'll walk to that point and I'll leave a little square of luminous tape. So I know that sometimes I can do it by eye. It depends on if I'm in somewhere that's got structure. So I'm in like a house and it's got, I don't know, it's got roof beams or anything like that that you can use as a guide. I don't need to. But sometimes I'll be out in the open and it's like, well, I need to know where I need to be starting this. So I'll go and I'll leave a little square of luminous tape at the key points. And that's all you need, because at that point, you know, sort of you go, you do your orb, switch off the light, and the camera can't see these. They're hidden behind rocks. But if you walk around, you can go, that's where I need to start, because I've measured it out beforehand. Because you are not, unless you are superhuman, going to be able to guess in the dark where to start a piece of light painting so that it doesn't overlap with a previous piece of light painting that you've done 10 meters forward and at a random size. You need to just go, right, okay, this is what my light painting is going to be. It's going to be this wide. Therefore, my 2 other start bits need to start over here and here. And I need to leave something to let me know that that's where I need to start. You can do it, obviously, you can do it with a friend. If you've got a friend with you, you can get somebody to lens cap, switch on the lights and, you know, sort of work it out in your head.
Yeah.
But luminous tape, good thing.
Cool, mate. I love it. I love it. This is a perfect segue into the last, well, there's many, but the final word, I usually pick about 3 is execution. And you just touched on some of the precision of the preparation it takes to do this execution. Can you speak on any other processes or processes that you use? You mentioned one is repetition. I mean, how many times do you, even though if the orb sucks and you're doing something, I'm talking very, very complex stuff now, and I don't get to talk complexity with a lot of people, and so I really appreciate the complexity of your work. Can you talk about repetition? One of the things I used to do is if I am doing a bunch of lines, and I think I showed you one where I just actually took me about 15 minutes. I just did glyphs all the way down.
Yeah. It was, lines of Matrix style.
It was mental, mate. It was all obviously one photo. It took me 15 minutes. I actually just did columns. It was a very repetitive process for me, but it really helped me. And so sometimes when I go right to left, I will just reverse the line left to right. And I'll just keep doing this and I'll learn. And I also paint with my left hand and my right hand, which I also think huge thing for people. You can get twice as much done. If your offhand is weak, I recommend doing simple things with it at first, like little plant grasses like I showed, just little kind of things that you're, anyway, can you speak on other executing, like how do you execute so well?
Well, there's various things. The first time I execute stuff, quite often it's terrible. Simple answer. You know, some of the most complicated, like if we talk about orbs as a starting point, I mean, I don't do quite as many of them as I used to nowadays, but some of the more complicated ones I did, I think there was one particular one, I tried about 20 to 30 times before I finally got it. And that was trying to leave a hole in the outer shell that I could put a smaller orb in the middle of. So basically just doing it where it had, one of those. Okay. That took me forever. Because trying to judge where you need to stop the left and the right hand side is really hard, because it's actually a lot further in towards the center than you think it is.
Yeah.
It sounds weird, but basically, because of the fact that the camera doesn't see stuff when it's at 90 degrees to the camera, because the light source is kind of hidden, actually where you think the edge of the orb is, it isn't. The edge of the orb's probably at about 10 degrees from 90, if that makes any sense, which means that if you then want to have a gap in the middle, you need to stop quite a lot further forward than you think you do. So the first times I did it, I kept that one only just manages to have the bit on the right hand side. It gets it in the end, but only just. And that took me loads. That's all. That took me many attempts. So you have to just keep trying and see what comes out of it, really. But in terms of how I execute things, I think probably the key things for me are, I have a very good understanding now of the relationship between the lengths of parts of my body, basically, and my light painting tools. So with some of the circle things, for example, I do them where I am using, this one's a good example. So they're all done at the end of my arm at full extension. Now, I know things like, for example, the relationship between the length of my arm at full extension with a light on the end of it and the length of my arm when it's got a plexi rod on the end of it. So I know that if I take a certain amount of, like a certain distance of step to my right, and I do a circle with my arm and a little keyring light in it, it will touch the edge of a circle that I've done with a big plexi rod. So it's like I know how far I need to move in order to get to the edge of one of these big discs. Equally, I know that if I kneel down, I know where a circle that I draw with my hand will kind of show up in another circle. So I know that essentially I can have vertical overlaps as well as horizontal overlaps. So again, this sort of stuff, that one I didn't, because I was doing it in my garden. There was enough ambient light knocking around that I could pretty much see what I was doing. So I think I put a 10p piece down so I knew where the middle was and did the rest by guesswork. But if I was doing something really complicated, and I've done ones with, sort of 20, 30 circles sometimes, then I use the luminous tape again. So I'll kind of go, okay, this is the center. And then I'll put down at most 5 pieces, but sometimes mainly 3. So I'll put one there, one, say, 1.5 meters away, 1.5 meters on the other direction. And that gives you enough reference points that you should be able to get both sides symmetrical, because you can go, okay, I'll do one in the middle. I'll do one at each of the glowy points. I'll do one halfway from the glowy points. And that's at one level. And then you can say, okay, now I want to do a different level. So I'll do a load kneeling down. But rather than starting in the same point, I'll go halfway between the center point and the center of the two of the points. So you go at a quarter and you draw one there, and then you do one at 3/4 as well. And they'll all overlap, and the centers of one layer will match up with the edges of another layer, and it sort of all ends up symmetrical. So marking stuff out helps, but it's all about knowing the lengths of your arm, the length of your legs, so that sort of if I kneel down, how's that going to affect the image, and just playing with things like that, really. And you can, for example, everybody probably knows just about how to do like a spun orb. Fine, you can do one of those. But and some people, quite often, they'll do a big one and then they'll do like a second one inside, and that's cool. But you rarely see people trying to, for example, kneel down and do the second one. And what that does is it gets a circle and it shifts the second orb down. And you end up with something that's a lot less centered and symmetrical, and it looks a lot more complicated. But there's no actual difference in the complexity of doing it. All you've done is shifted your position slightly. And there's a lot of stuff like that you can do. If you can work out where the edges of your orbs are, you can have stuff that sort of, intersects an existing orb, and you can get some quite cool things going on there. I think probably the hardest thing I ever did in that kind of stuff was I did a Death Star in a bottle once, which was basically doing an orb and leaving a hole in one edge, and then having a tube that was the right size coming out of it.
Awesome.
And yeah, that took a few attempts, but it just came down to the fact that there's a few things. First of all, the eye is incredibly good at playing tricks on you. It doesn't have to be right. People think, I get people asking a lot. They say, sort of, how do you get it that perfect? Yeah. The answer is it's not. It's way off. In a lot of places, it's miles off.
Yeah.
I work at big scale sometimes. Yeah. I think probably the biggest I've ever done has probably been 8 or 10 meters across. Cool. Really big buildings, lots of space. And in an 8 or 10 meter design, you can be easily half a meter out, and nobody will really notice it. And equally, the more complexity you throw in, the less people notice the details. Sort of, if you've got 3 lines in an image and they do not touch, people will notice. If you chuck 500 lines into an image and 3 of them don't match, no one's going to notice. And that's the thing. You can hide some pretty big sins if you do something that's relatively complicated, because people will look at it and just go, wow, that's seriously complicated. And you're like, yeah, it's not right, but you can't tell. And something actually, somebody asked that on the talk that I was doing a while back, the one you talked about in Spanish, about how do I make it so that it doesn't look like essentially when you put all of the lights on top of each other, how do you make it so it doesn't look like a mess? Which is actually a really good question.
Yes.
Because it's a fascinating thing, which is that, well, or at least this is my understanding of it, and it seems to work, so I'm going with it. Which is that the eye is really good at tricking people. And the way I understand it is that the eye will give more visual weight to something that is brighter. So if you put something bright in the frame, it tends to sort of grab the attention. So a classic example is I do some stuff which are, I call them light discs. I don't know, they don't really have a name, but basically I get a plexi rod and I'll draw a strobe circle. And then in the middle, I'll fill it with a plasma. So it almost looks like a sort of Stargate-y type thing.
Okay.
But the thing is, when you look at it, it looks as if I have stopped that plasma perfectly at the edge of the circle. I haven't. I've filled the whole damn thing. It's just that the eye sees the bright bit and goes, focusing on that. Yeah. And you don't notice the kind of blue hazy stuff that's behind it because your eye just focus. Well, I mean, that's a classic. The orange in that goes behind the yellow. I haven't done anything clever that makes that orange, sort of stop at exactly where the edge of the yellow circle is. It goes behind it. It's just that because the yellow is brighter than the orange, your eye makes it stand in front of the orange. And same with the white. The reason that the white looks like it's in front of all the other stuff is because it's brighter. It's that simple. If I'd have done it with a really dull white, you'd have been able to see the orange through it, and it would look a mess. So it's that thing about brightness, really, which is that if you want to make it so that whatever it is that you're about to draw looks like it's gone in front of the thing that you've just drawn, make it a bit brighter, and it'll stand out.
Mate, that's huge. That's something that, honestly, as much light painting as I've done in trial and error, which is tons, I honestly didn't even think about that. So, dude, mate, thank you. That is amazing, and amazing example here on exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that in detail and you look at the gaps between the sort of yellow lines on that yellow pattern, you can actually see the orange strobe shapes in there. But when you look at it, you don't think that they're there. Your brain looks at it and thinks, I've got a yellow pattern, I've got orange things, and the orange things stop at the point where the yellow things start. They don't. They go behind the yellow thing. It's just that your eye doesn't notice it because it's not as bright. And sort of that's I mean, it's the same in a way with the background, which is why I tend to try and be careful. I mean, this one obviously I didn't really have any choice because I don't know what it's like where you are, but we're in lockdown, no leaving the house. I'm lucky enough that I have a back garden which it turns out is actually dark enough that I can light paint in, which I was surprised by, but when there's no clouds and there's no light reflecting, it's possibly perfectly doable.
Amazing.
But if I'd have been doing this manually in somewhere, I was out somewhere interesting, I would have made sure that I didn't throw any light onto the tree in the background.
Yeah.
Because where it has got light, you can see the blossom coming through the light painting. Exactly. And that ruins the effect of solidity. So that's probably one area that I might work a little bit different to a lot of people, in that a lot of light painters say don't ever light from behind the camera, if you know what I mean, because if you're lighting from behind the camera into the scene, it's quite flat.
Mm-hmm.
And they're right, it is. And if I can, I will work with a backlight. But equally, the one thing that you can do with a front light, which is quite interesting, is you can have the light fade out as it moves towards the light painting, because obviously it falls off in intensity the further away it goes from the camera. So if I'm in a tunnel, I may actually quite often use front lighting, because what I can do is I can have my light painting, you can have the light painting chucking light towards the camera in one color. So if you draw an orb in orange, then it'll chuck orange light out onto the ceiling, onto the floor. So that's a classic example. The lighting that's round the edges in blue is done from the two sides, and it's done from behind the camera. All of the other lighting is coming from the light painting itself. And what ends up happening if you do it right is that the two colors mix, and the advantage of it is because I've not lit from behind, the light painting hasn't got any transparency at all, because behind the light painting is black, literally black. There's no light there at all. And so, front lighting has its uses. You need to be careful with it. I definitely don't do it from directly behind the camera. What I tend to do is step off towards whatever it is that I'm lighting. So in this case, I'll have gone right to the edges of the tunnel and scanned along the wall with a torch to bring out as much texture as possible. But yeah, that's it. But effectively, by doing it that way round, it means that symbol in the middle doesn't have any risk of there being light behind it, which makes it look washed out. It's an interesting one, and you could do something like this with a backlight scanner as well, obviously. But again, you'd be the tricky bit with the backlight scanner is with this effect, because I'm shooting from behind the camera, you get a natural fall off of light. It just uses the inverse square law like everything else, and basically the further away it gets from camera, the weaker it gets. Easy, which means you get that natural lack of, so it fades. If you're doing it with a backlight scanner, you somehow need to make sure that the stuff that's behind the light painting is weaker than the stuff as you get past the light painting. And that's quite tricky, because you either need to walk slower and then faster kind of thing to get your illumination balance or things like that. So I suppose that's just it's using science to your best advantage, which is the further away from the torch the light is, the weaker it gets. So if you light towards your light painting, you can guarantee that the light will get weaker and weaker and weaker as it gets past the light painting in terms of depth, and therefore your light painting will stand out more on top of the background.
Awesome. No, thank you, mate. That's a great explanation. I think this is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Let me jump back in the driver's seat. Love it. I love it. I love these new backgrounds because we can actually talk about the photos in the
podcast. Works really well.
I didn't actually know about this, and now I'm glad that I'm not opposed to scaling up my productivity, but like post processing, I kind of just like the organic feel. That's just me. I like to kind of see where it takes me. And I think that's part of the adventure, right? Like I honestly have never, ever, ever, ever sketched out anything. I've never really planned out anything. I really, really hit the shutter and I kind of have an idea because I have the right tools. Like I'll have like, okay, in this picture example, I'll have like 2 different size circle blades. I'll have different gels cut out in different shapes for the eyes of the plants. And I'll have obviously my keychain flashlight or a flare, and I'll have, this is Frank's flashlight, which gives it a little bit thicker lines. So I like to use different thickness of torches because that obviously gives you immediately depth and different looks. Like people are like, whoa, why is that plant leaf that much bigger and that one's tiny? And that's like, okay, there's a blade of grass, and that makes sense because the leaves are bigger.
Some of them are big, some of them are small. Yeah.
So I love it, mate. And I try not to over plan my stuff, but that's something I'm honestly working on, is because if I plan it, then I can scale it. And if I don't plan it, it's harder. I can do it. It's a lot more challenging, but I find that sometimes it takes me an extra 10 attempts versus if I just had like it all written out. And I've even actually mentioned this on a previous podcast. I'm not sure if you follow American football, but sometimes
a playbook.
Yeah, exactly. The play one. If you look at the quarterback, he's running the offense he's moving the ball. He often has an armband with the plays written out on it. And I've thought about that because often I turn my back to the camera.
And if it just sort of
some sort of illumination, I'm like, cool, this is a 7-layer, like you call a 7-step light painting, a 7-level light painting. To me, I'm already on 4. By the time I get to 4, and it's probably 4 minutes in,
you forgot what it was.
I don't even remember what I was doing on 5, 6, and 7, which should be either more complicated because I'm actually using a smaller, finer tipped like Light Painting Paradise pencil. I'm putting in all of the details. But by that point, I honestly, mate, I'm just like so spacey gone in a different realm that I can't even remember what I've done. And often that leads to a crash of the car. I feel like I'm driving, it's like, cool, keep it between the lines, keep it between the lines, keep it between the lines. And actually, it's a really good segue and something that obviously I think when you get into higher level light paintings, it's something I've asked, Sam Mass, how do you know when to stop? Because once you have the technical skills of I can draw pretty much anything, I can do that. It's half of me is remembering what I've done so I don't overdo it. Mm-hmm. And the other half of me is, can I safely add more complexity to this image without, oh shit, like, oh no, I just did that. And as soon as you do one as an artist, right? As soon as you're just like,
no, I've cocked that up. Yeah.
The record is scratching.
Yeah. And the worst thing about it is the more complicated your designs get, the longer it is that you've just ruined. You can be. I remember there was one I did in Menorca. I'd gone out on holiday with my other half, and I'd found this building, and it had a beautiful doorway, perfect size for drawing things in. And I thought, brilliant. I'm going to set up camera rotation tool, and I'm going to basically draw something, rotate the camera, draw the same thing again, rotate the camera, draw the same thing again. And between each one, I was alternating colors. So I'd done one in blue and then one in pink, one in blue, one in pink. And I'd done 5 out of 6 rotations, and I got the angle wrong. So I was doing something like 60 degrees, and I ended up doing I did a 45-degree one or something along those lines. I can't remember quite how I got it wrong, but anyway. And I knew the moment I'd done it, and it had taken me 10 minutes to draw the other 5 so far, and it was just like, oh.
Oh no, I totally get it, man. I've been actually doing like 10 plus minutes of just the light painting pencil, and that's it. That's the only tool I use. I illustrate the whole scene with just that. I probably can throw up a picture of this, but again, it took me a lot of attempts. It could be just down to drawing a huge tree, and how many leaves are on that tree could be 5 minutes of leaves because I'm doing them literally individually. Sometimes I use a blade and I just pop the blade, much like the light painter will give me. That's super simple. I've done a tutorial on this. I hope everyone is painting trees. Anyway, yeah. So I totally know. So I do the tree, and then I don't know if you've seen it, but I actually here I'll pull it up. I did a cocoon. I
saw that one.
I drew a cocoon, and that was interesting because I had to hand paint. I had to like really spatially try to make the cocoon the way it is. And honestly, if I did one branch of the tree coming out of the middle of the tree, that didn't work. And so then I was like, I just spent 15 minutes doing everything else perfect. And then I just didn't get to the tree, and I was like, oh, and then I screwed up the tree, and I was like, oh, I just ruined this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you do the same, but what I've started doing on some of the ones that I do is I will reorganize the way that I do them so that I do the hardest part first.
Yeah.
So basically I'll have a go. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah. So I'll actually, so if I know that there's something that's going to cause me a problem, or at least is the bit that I keep getting wrong, I'll start with that. And that way, if I screw it up, I've only knackered, a minute's worth of time. And then I can go and do, if I don't screw it up, I can do the rest of the picture. Whereas if if you leave it till last, you can have done 10 minutes of lovely light painting, and then you get to the hard bit and you get it wrong.
I know that all too well, and I often, like you, I think that's a great thing for people to glean is that do the hard part first. Something Chris Bauer taught me when I was with him. He's like, if there's ever a struggle or you think that you can't do it, because like we said just now, you can feel when it's not right. I can feel when the circle's not perfect. I can feel when my lines don't connect, and I'm like, oh, I just screwed that one up. You know what? I'm torn. Actually, I'm really torn about this. Either do you just keep plowing through and you keep persevering because you're gonna honestly maybe that mistake-ish. Is it a mistake? Could it be artistic? Could it add something to the mix? I'm a perfectionist in a way. I think when you get to a higher level of execution and complexity, there's a bit of perfection that comes in that, and that's my double-edged sword. Honestly, sometimes
it depends on your style as well, very much. In that, sort of with something like mine, which is based around, sort of geometry and symmetry. When it's wrong, it's so clearly wrong that there's not really much point plowing on. I tend to just bail instantly. It's just like, no, that's wrong. I'll just bail out of there and see, so I don't think I've ever gone back to because what I'll do is I'll bail out, I'll go click the shutter, and I don't think I've ever looked at the shutter and thought, damn it, I should have continued. I generally look at it and think, yeah, that was wrong.
Totally. I've been surprised, actually. But you know what? I usually stop it sort of in the middle or the beginning. If I'm pretty far in, I'll probably let it go because
just keep going.
At that point, it's like playing Texas Hold'em, if you know about this poker game. It's on the final card, or like I call it the river. Like if you're already betting on every level up to that point,
might as well take the risk.
You might as well go the distance.
True.
Mate, I'm going to completely do a segue here. I saw this post from Tim Gamble, and he mentioned this mysterious product called neck oil. Do you know what this neck oil is? I wish I had a picture. I tried to go back in his feed and find it. It looks like this viscous amber sort of product. Do you have any idea what neck oil is?
The only thing I can think of is that it's a shortcut. It's a because there's lots and lots, as with everybody, so the UK has lots and lots of slang.
Yes.
The only thing I can think of is if it's a viscous amber product, it could well be beer. As in, it's neck oil. Because in England, you talk about necking a pint.
Awesome. Okay.
As in, it goes down the neck. So, but it's not one that I've heard of. I'd have to dig around in his post history and see what it was. But there is an awful lot of, as always in every country, there's a lot of slang out there, and it may well just mean beer or a cup of tea or
I'm gonna go with beer. I think it's beer. I love his post. I love his creativity. I love Phil Fisher and his creativity, and everyone in the UK is like so funny. I had an amazing podcast with Kim Van Cole, and it was great. Super knowledgeable. with her. What does the quote, "A wizard is never late. He arrives precisely when he means to." What does this quote mean to you? Do you know who said the quote?
That sounds like, isn't that Tolkien, Gandalf?
It's Tolkien. It is Tolkien. Are you a fan of Lord of the Rings and some of that sci-fi stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's right up my kind of street of things. I read the book when I was. I seem to remember it was a bad idea because I used to have, when I was a kid, I read a lot, and I still do when I get the time. But I was one of those people who, if I started a book, I read the book until I finished the book, kind of thing. I didn't read it and then put it down and, come back to it the next day. So I used to start books and then, it'd take me a few hours and I'd read the book and done. And I remember I started Lord of the Rings, and I think I was still reading it like 2:00 in the morning or something, because it's about 1,000 pages long. I mean, like that kind of stuff. As for "A wizard is never late, he always arrives when he wants to." It's just a good quote, isn't it? Really, it just says, sort of, if you know what you're doing, it's just like, I do things the way that I want to, kind of thing.
Although obviously the reason why I asked you, you use, sometimes Elvish. I think I've seen some Elvish.
You have seen some Elvish.
Yes.
Yeah. So I use a Magilite, which is like the pixel stick equivalent-y thing. Yeah. But they've got a short version. So they've got like a meter. I've got it over here somewhere. Just a second. So obviously the standard pixel stick's like 1.5 meters long or whatever it is, which isn't very useful if you want to use it as like small decoration. But the Magilite do one like that. So it's only 30 centimeters long. And basically it's standard pixel sticky things. Have I got any battery? Yeah, I have got some battery. So you select an image, and it basically flashy lights on the pattern. So the first thing I do to sort of make sure that what I'm doing is very much my own thing is I tend to draw the patterns myself in Photoshop. So in the case of the Magilite, it's 42 pixels long. So what I'll do is I'll create a 42 pixel square and then draw my patterns in that using a pencil in Photoshop. And then you can turn it into a pattern and fill a long image with it. So you get a repeated pattern. And then that gives me that. But yeah, I was looking for something. I was doing some work with a very talented cosplay artist called Amy Telford. And it was like, she said, "Oh, I'm going to bring along a Maleficent outfit." Awesome. And I was like, okay, so I want something magic related. And I was like, well, how can I get some runes? So I did a bit of search and I found a website which allows you to basically type in English and it creates you Tolkien's Elvish runes.
Awesome.
And it's brilliant. It took me a bit of technical faffery because you've got to download like a font that works, and it took me a while to work out how to do that, but in the end I grabbed hold of this font and installed it on Windows, and then basically all you'd do was I would type in this stuff. It would convert that into a sequence of characters that I needed to type in order to get them correctly in this font. And then I would copy that and put it into Photoshop into text. And that would create in the right font and it would create the Elvish runes. So the thing that I've got with the Elvish runes going around in circles, which look like fantastic Elvish runes, actually says copyright Tom Hill.
Oh, awesome. I love it. Oh, what better way to embed your watermark than in Elvish? I love it. I absolutely love it. And I love that piece. I don't have a copy of that one, but I do know which one you're talking about. It's definitely the one I'm referencing. It was spectacular. It was very well executed. The model was amazing. The outfit, everything was done really well. The color scheme for Maleficent, this I think it was a purple kind of lavender kind of magic.
Yeah, kind of thing.
And again, picking the color that goes with the model, that goes with the feel, right? We're telling a story with our art, always, at least I am. I try to tell a story. I try to invoke an emotion, if you will. I think art is very emotional. Not spirit. It is spiritual. We're not going to talk about that.
no, it's cool. It's actually interesting because I mean, this is where I probably deviate from quite a lot of people, and I think it's because I'm, so I understand I am clearly, an artist, but I don't necessarily feel like an artist, if that makes sense. I very much see myself as a physicist, a mathematician, a logical type person. Part of that is that I don't particularly think in terms of stories, and I know there are a lot of people who do. So when I go out with some of the Spanish guys or things like that, they're very much thinking about, sort of what they want to say with a picture. Whereas I literally am thinking about what I want it to look like. I don't necessarily think I want it to give this emotion. I want it to say this. I want people to think about this. I just think I've got this cool design in my head and I want to draw that design. I don't necessarily, if people ask me what my photos mean, they don't mean anything. They mean, I was lying in bed one night and I thought, holy crap, if I were to do an orb and then I were to take one of these and fire it out the side, it would look like a Death Star, and that'd be cool as hell. And then I've gone and tried it. But it wasn't that I was thinking, sort of, oh yes, I want to get the impression of solitude or anything like that. No, I mean, I don't really work that way. And I know there are a lot of people who do. And it's just, as there's a good old English expression, different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely. And that's the key to this game. That's the key to art. That's the key to humanity, is that we're all uniquely ourselves. And that's why I truly, really believe that, when you're an artist, you portray that. If you want to tell a story, you're going to be a storyteller. If you want to be in a very executed, orderly, structured artist, you're going to do that. And a little bit of mix in between, and then that's the beautiful thing about everyone doing their own thing. I love it, man. Hey, Tom, have you ever had your midichlorians tested? I feel like yours might be off the charts.
Midichlorians?
Midichlorians? Do you know what the word means?
I should do, but I can't remember. Is it not something to do with? No, that's telomeres, which are to do with DNA. No, you're gonna have to remind me because it rings the bell.
Yeah, so midichlorians are the spectrum of how do you quantify a Jedi's power?
Oh, that was the one. Yeah.
So yeah, there's no way to obviously test this. I think that yours would be, close in the ranks of Anakin. He's like 30 million, above anyone else. It's funny because, like you, and another thing when we were talking before this podcast was, you mentioned, I don't feel like an artist. And I think speak around this serious topic, it is a very limiting topic, something that I struggle with, something that almost every artist at one point in their career struggle with. And, thank you for bringing it up, because, this podcast is a full, complete artist creative process and not just about happy-go-lucky light painting. This is, about struggling to break into the commercial market, struggling to talk about the courage it takes to do live light paintings, the courage it takes to do a podcast, the courage it takes to be in front of the camera, the courage it takes to just put your vulnerable art, something that is a piece of you, out into the world, and risk criticism, risk commenting, and that's part of being an artist. And I often don't think I'm an artist either. Actually, I grew up very non-spiritual. I actually grew up loving math. I never was I never was a photographer. In fact, I was a light painter before I even actually really took any kind of photos in the daytime, which is another funny story. But yeah, so, it's something we all struggle with, something that I hope that people can come to grips with and learn from and grow from, because we all struggle with it. And you're an amazing artist. Don't ever forget that, and don't let social media tell you that your piece of art is not good or what is good. It is, especially again, we can go back to the commercial side of it. What's mainstream, what's not. I hope to see non-mainstream art. I will definitely engage with non-mainstream art more than I will with mainstream art. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's
my other half and I are massive fans of street art. So we've actually got some stuff. There's a guy in the UK whose stuff I absolutely adore, and I would recommend you check him out, which is a guy called Dan Kitchener.
Dan Kitchener. Okay.
Dan Kitchener. He does these amazing. Well, he does all sorts of stuff, but sort of Tokyo-inspired, sort of future cityscape type stuff. But he does them big scale graffiti, sort of massive walls. And a guy called Replete as well. Again, another UK graffiti artist. And we've got a few bits and bobs. We've got a Shepherd Fairy and things like that. Just people that we really like. And I always try and sort of get the odd print from street artists I like. Strangely, it doesn't really inspire me particularly as a light painter, because the stuff that I like in street art doesn't translate particularly into the kind of stuff that I do, but I just like it, and therefore if I can, I've got the money, I'll buy some, because it looks good on the walls and I like it. But yeah, I think the thing that I struggle with, which isn't, well, there's a few things. I don't know if you get the same, but first of all, I find it really, really weird when people sort of to be recognized at all, if you know what I mean. Not sort of in terms of people saying, oh, your work's good, but as in just you'll be somewhere and people are like, oh my God, you're Tom Hill. And it's like, yeah, I have been for 40 years. And I don't know what you find, but it's kind of weird, because I still see myself, and I think a lot of light painters still see themselves as beginners. You know what I mean? I'm by no means as good as I could be. I am I go out with other light painters. I go out with people like Frodo, for example, who will talk about photos he was doing before I even picked up a camera and started light painting.
Me too.
I was talking to him and he was like, oh yeah, so I did this one back in such and such in 2000 and whatever it was. And he's been doing this for 10, 12 years or something like this. And I'm thinking, well, 10, 12 years ago was when I picked up my camera for the first time and started doing landscape photography. And I've only been doing like light painting for probably around 4 years now. So I find it really weird when people come up to me, sort of at conferences and are like, oh my God. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of odd. I mean, it's nice. But I don't know about you. I find it quite hard to get my head around occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't figure out a way. No, I agree, and I love Frodo. He's got an amazing attitude, like you said. He's always willing to help people in the community, and you just gotta love that. Mate, have you ever shot at Stonehenge? This is our version over here in my area.
That is a freaking amazing location. You cannot shoot at actual Stonehenge, unfortunately, because it's like a Schedule 1 ancient monument, sort of World Heritage Site type thing. So it's kind of fairly well roped off. However, Tim Gamble and I and Chris Thompson have shot at a place that's really bizarre in North Yorkshire, which I found by accident one day when I was basically I'd gone to go for a meeting with a client, and I was thinking, well, where can I stop off on the way back? It was a couple of hours drive, and it was winter, so it was going to be dark by the time I was driving back. And I thought, well, where can I stop off and do just like an hour of light painting on my way back? What an amazing place. And basically the Victorians, being Victorian and weird like they were in our country, had built pretty much a completely fake stone circle, complete with like an altar and a bunch of stone chairs around this big stone table and a cave, just in the middle of this wood in Yorkshire somewhere. And there you can shoot. So Tim and I have done a few things there, but man, that looks amazing. I'd love to shoot somewhere like that. But no, Stonehenge, unfortunately, not an option.
Do you believe that maybe some extraterrestrial activity happens at Stonehenge, or there is some sort of, in ancient times, maybe 5,000, 10,000 years ago, that we've possibly been visited there? Like, what can you tell us a little bit about it? Because I know a little bit about it, but I'm wrapping my head around this. What's out there in the universe?
I think basically it's one of those variants on people a long time ago were mental. Yeah. They built some seriously ridiculous things, when they didn't have access to cranes and earth-moving equipment and all of the things that you would think. I mean, it's the equivalent of the pyramids. It's like when you find out about it, they brought the rocks to make it from miles away. You would assume that they went to wherever the hell the nearest quarry was, and they got the rocks and they carried it, a mile down the road, and they put it up. It came from hundreds of miles away, this rock. And these things are person and a half high minimum, and quite often like a person wide. They weigh, tons and tons. And the amount of effort that goes in is phenomenal. Personally, I'm not a one for the extraterrestrial theories. Very much a sort of based around the sort of the physical views, the physicists' views on that one, if you know what I mean.
Totally.
Certainly not someone who would discount the possibility of life existing somewhere else in the universe. Absolutely not. I mean, there's various arguments for and against, and I think you could spend a happy several hours discussing, sort of all the stuff to do with the paradoxes around, sort of if space is infinite, then are there infinite? Shouldn't there be an infinite number of intelligent species? And of course, then you've got the other alternative, which is, well, yeah, but you've got a visible horizon based on the amount of how far you can see based on 15 billion years of light speed, so you've only got a bubble of that infinity that you can actually contact, and then species that get created and then they get destroyed, so you need to coincide in terms of the points at which you are a technologically advanced state enough to be able to catch each other's signals. And yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating topic. I personally don't think that they're wandering around picking up Higgs in spacecraft.
Yeah.
And probing them.
At least not that we know of yet. Although I would put it out there publicly, if there's ever an extraterrestrial encounter and you don't want to be in this encounter, I will gladly take your place. So if anyone's watching this and has something like this, please just say timeout. I know I will. I'm sure they know. I don't know. Maybe they won't know who I am, but absolutely. I will say, come to Portland, Oregon. You'll find me. I'm sure that they'll be able to have technology to find me. Come find me, and I'm willing to go.
Yeah, because they get these things, don't they? They sort of, so the people who say, "Oh, I was abducted by aliens," and they're always say, "Oh, I was terrified." Dude,
I want to learn.
Fascinated.
Yeah. Take me.
They wouldn't be able to shut me up. I'd just be like, "Hang on a minute, right? What are you made of? Are you carbon? What's your biology? Do you eat? What have you got sexes? What the fuck? What's your spaceship powered by? That looks 100%. Like a tractor beam. How does it work?"
Yes. Teach me everything you know about light. I mean, I use light. I'm sure they have different means of using light and applications for it. And oh man, traveling with it. I mean, come on. This is just, this is some really fascinating. Like you said, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but we could go for hours on this one. Mate, Tom, I ask everyone on the show, I'm sure you know this, do you listen to music while you light paint? And can you give us one song that would inspire you that we can listen to either while light painting or on the way to light painting? What's one song you got to add to the playlist?
Oh, dude, I wasn't aware of, I hadn't thought of that one in advance. I don't listen to it generally when I'm light painting.
Yeah.
I will do now and again, but partly because I'll tend to be, in an abandoned building or something, and I don't necessarily want to be putting music out there. And equally, if you're in an abandoned building, you want to have your ears open just in case, you hear something or whatever it might be. So I don't tend to listen to it while I'm light painting. I am a big sort of musical fan historically. So I used to, like when I was at university, I used to run club nights. Cool. I was involved in the free party scene in Newcastle for a bit, cool. And that was tended to be around sort of trance and Goa trance, acid house, that kind of stuff.
Cool.
I started DJing when I was about 15 or so. And still do occasionally when I get time, but I do all the sort of chilled out drum and bass style. So not the really banging mental club stuff, but sort of I started off on LTJ Bookham and that sort of relaxed, laid back stuff. And now I'll do some of the liquid stuff. And And I suppose the stuff, so I listen to a lot of very good sort of electronic chill out, I suppose. So, I mean, the only problem is now, I don't know if you found nowadays, but because a lot of it's electronic nowadays, I find it a lot harder to remember the names of people.
Yeah.
Do you find the same? Because
It's
like
just too
when you
many.
had a CD, you
Yeah.
could remember what the cover looked like
Totally.
and things like that. So it's like, yeah, I know who that. Whereas now I download it and I put it on my phone and then I forget who the hell it is. So it's a bit harder. I've been listening to some stuff recently from a group called Zero Cult. It's electronic chill out. It's kind of like a really slow trance. Would recommend it. It's really nice electronic music, nice and laid back. There's an album called Closer Than Ever by Zero Cult, which is quite cool, and I've been listening to quite a lot recently. So yeah, it's a neat thing. But there's lots of, there's loads of stuff. I'll send you if you're going to sort of do a little bit of editing. I'll send you a few things when I have a look, see what you think. But yeah, I don't tend to listen to it when I'm light painting though. Is the simple answer to that question.
Yeah, no worries. Some people are like all about the inspiration and doing it, and some people are like, no, I need quiet on set. I need that sort of distracting. I'm either it's not the right tempo, or it's not the right song. Something that is going to, I'm thinking about the lyrics and I'm trying to sing the song and I'm not thinking about the
details
layer of my huge, composition. So thank you. I will listen to Zero Cult, Closer Than Ever. I feel like tonight's going to be a very creative night. I'm always super inspired when I get to sit down with amazing artists. Obviously, this is the first time that we've interacted. I think, we gleaned so much information from this podcast. Tom, thank you so much. One final question, mate. If you could go back to the first maybe 2 or 3 months that you were light painting, and you could tell the beginner light painter version of yourself 1 or 2 things to really remember as you walk forward in this career or this path, what would you tell yourself?
No, that's a good one. Definitely to try more, I think, because generally what I've found is that the thing that holds you back more than anything is not trying something because you think that you won't be able to get it right, or not even, sometimes it's not even thinking about it, if you know what I mean. You know how to do something, so you do it, and you never think, well, what would happen if? So nowadays, one of the things that I do, and I don't know if anyone else does the same, but every now and again, I will go out and I will deliberately take a very, very limited selection of tools. So I'll basically say, right, tonight is about, I don't know, tonight I'm basically going to focus on calligraphy, or I'm going to focus on orbs or something like that. And I go out and I have a limited set of tools. And it just says, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to try everything I can possibly think of just with this one tool. So, if you normally use fiber optics to create fire and you say, well, I'm not taking my fiber optic with me, and all you've got is a plexi rod or, an acrylic rod, can I create fire with an acrylic rod? And it forces you to try stuff. And quite often it doesn't do what you want it to. But what it does do is give you an effect that you've never done before. And then you can think, well, what can I use that for? And that's so yeah, I think probably that kind of stuff, which is, look, it doesn't matter if you don't think that something you're going to try is going to look right, because it doesn't have to look right. It has to look interesting. And if it looks interesting, then you can use it for something else. And it doesn't have to be for the thing that you initially intended it to. I reckon probably 90% of my best photos have come out because I tried something thinking one thing would happen, and something totally different happened, but it looked cool. And then I just went, hang on a minute. If I use that in this way, it'll look awesome. And I think so, yeah, probably that.
Mate, I couldn't agree more. One of the life mottos that I kind of live by is you don't know until you try. And, I think a lot of people are afraid to try new things, and a lot of people are afraid to make the mistake. And it's like, it's not, I actually go out and if I don't make mistakes during light painting, or if I'm doing some sort of sport like snowboarding, if I'm not falling or crashing or trying a new trick that I'm working on, why am I doing it? You know, I mean, I'm not pushing myself further. And so you don't know until you try. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. I totally encourage people to go out. You're not failing. In fact, the process of actually trying something new is rewiring your brain to think outside the box. And once you do that, you'll be amazed at how that snowballs and how you will progress and just come up with new things. And I think some of those new things are the most rewarding because they came from you, and they came from your trial and error. They came from your heart. They came from your blood, sweat, and tears, and your extra 20 minutes, 50 kilometers away from your house. You're like, oh, I'm tired, but I want to try that one, or I want to get that last one perfect. Those are the ones that keep you coming back, and those are the ones that keep you, your soul ignited and on fire. And mate, I just thank you.
There was one of the sort of I suppose a saying which I used to have occasionally, which I'd do when I was going out, and I found it was quite a good way of kind of when I was going out to practice. So I wasn't going out with friends or something like that. I was going out because I wanted to try and do some stuff. And you've heard the expression something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue.
I haven't, but I love
it. It's an English saying. I'm not entirely sure where it comes from or what the hell it means, in fact, in its actual expression. But it's an old English saying, and I used to kind of follow it when I went out. So I would try when I went out. The first thing I would do was something old, by which I would mean something that I already knew how to do, and I would try and practice it, perfect it, or whatever. And the advantage of that is it meant that the first picture that I did was something that I could pretty much guarantee would come out well. And that meant that I already had in my back pocket a picture that I was happy enough with, that I didn't feel any pressure for the rest of the night, because I'd got something that was like, that's quite a cool picture. Cool. So the first thing I would do was something old. Then I'd try something new. So something I'd never tried before, which was basically, okay, let's try this, see if it works. And 90% of the time it doesn't work, but you don't know until you try. And then I didn't do the something blue, but something borrowed. I would basically try and sort of think of something from another light painter that I'd seen and see if I could give that a show. And then say, right, okay, well, let's try that and see how that comes out. So yeah, something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue if you want to, but I wasn't too worried about the blue.
I love it, mate. I think that sums it up perfectly. Tom, I think we're concluding this podcast. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing hour and 40 minutes. It didn't seem like it. It seemed like for a while. It's just an amazing amount of information, amazing getting to know you and your process. From me to you, super fan, thanks so much, mate. I look forward to more creations with the new Light Painter Paradise torch, all the new creative kit that I just received. I've never done acrylic rods. You use them a lot. You've inspired me to create some things similar to this. Mate, thanks, man. I'll see you. Hopefully I'll meet you soon.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, mate. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully catching up with you in person one day.
I love it, mate. All right. Take care.
Cheers, bud.
Cheers.